Abandoned during a sandstorm, a helpless baby was left at the mercy of the desert, with only a golden amulet marked with the symbol of Ra as the sole proof of his true lineage. Raised far from palace walls and noble whispers, he grew up among papyrus scrolls and stars, becoming a man with a sharp mind and an unbreakable spirit, never imagining that the blood of a pharaoh ran through his veins. 25 years later, he returns to Memphis with no name, no title, but a fierce determination to forge his own destiny. Unbeknownst to him, his arrival stirs whispers in the temple halls, suspicion among the nobles, and catches the eye of a woman who could change everything. Amid ancient secrets, divine decrees, and ruthless laws, he must face a past that tried to erase him and a future that calls him back to the place that was always his, the throne of the Nile. The wind howled like 1,000 wounded jackals that night, tearing across the vast Egyptian desert with such fury that even the experienced nomads sought shelter in whatever crevice or hollow they could find. Sand particles stung any exposed skin like tiny daggers, and the sky, normally a canvas of brilliant stars, had disappeared behind a veil of swirling ochre and brown. On this merciless night, a hooded figure struggled against the elements, clutching a small bundle wrapped in linen against her chest. Her footsteps were unsteady, her breathing labored. Blood trickled down her leg, leaving a spotty trail that the storm quickly erased. She had given birth merely hours ago, in a small tent hidden in a forgotten wadi, assisted only by an elderly midwife who had sworn secrecy on her own life. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. Just a little further. The woman was no ordinary Egyptian. Her hands, though now cracked and bleeding from her journey, bore the fine calluses of one who had played the lyre in the royal chambers. Her posture, even in her weakened state, carried the dignity of those raised in the pharaoh's household. She had been the favorite concubine of Pharaoh until her womb swelled with his child, a child that powerful enemies in the court insisted would bring destruction to the two lands if allowed to live. The acacia tree appeared before her like a mirage, ancient, gnarled, and somehow defiant against the punishing storm. Its branches, usually spread like protective arms, now bent and swayed in violent submission to the wind. This tree was known to the locals as blessed by the gods themselves, said to have sprouted from a tear of Isis as she searched for the pieces of her beloved Osiris. "This is where you must wait, my son," she said, dropping to her knees beneath the minimal shelter of the tree's trunk. With trembling fingers, she adjusted the swaddling, revealing the peaceful face of a newborn boy, his skin the warm golden brown of the Nile's blessed people, his eyes, when briefly they had opened, as dark and deep as the night sky. Around the baby's neck, she placed an amulet, a disc of pure gold bearing the symbol of Ra, the sun god. It had been given to her by the pharaoh himself on the night they had conceived this forbidden child. "This will protect you and prove your lineage when the time comes," she whispered, pressing her lips to the baby's forehead one last time. "May the gods watch over you until someone worthy finds you." She tucked the bundle into a small hollow at the base of the tree, sheltered somewhat from the worst of the wind. The baby, exhausted from the journey, slept on, unaware of being abandoned, unaware of the royal blood that flowed through his tiny veins, unaware of the prophecy that had condemned him before he had drawn his first breath. The woman staggered back, clutching her chest as if physically tearing herself away from her child. She had been commanded to drown the baby in the Nile, to return with proof of the deed. Instead, she chose this desperate gamble, giving her son at least a chance at life, even if it meant her own certain death when she returned empty-handed. "Live," she commanded through her tears, before turning and disappearing into the swirling vortex of sand. Hours passed. The storm raged on, yet miraculously, the hollow remained relatively protected. As the first hint of dawn broke through the eastern sky, the winds finally began to subside. The desert slowly settled, revealing a transformed landscape of new dunes and exposed rock formations. It was in this strange quiet that Amenhotep, a traveling healer from a nomadic tribe, stumbled upon the acacia tree. He had weathered the storm in a small cave not far away and was now checking his usual gathering spots for herbs that might have survived the onslaught. "By all the gods," he gasped when he heard the unmistakable cry of an infant. Amenhotep had seen much in his 58 years, plagues, wars, the rise and fall of nobles, but finding a living baby abandoned in the desert after such a storm struck him speechless. He knelt beside the hollow, his weathered hands carefully extracting the bundle. "Who would leave you here, little one?" he murmured, his voice a gentle rasp. The baby's cries subsided as Amenhotep cradled him, tiny fingers grasping at the healer's graying beard. "And who wrapped you so carefully with such fine linen?" He noticed the golden amulet gleaming against the baby's chest and quickly tucked it out of sight. Such a valuable item told a story of its own, one potentially dangerous to this innocent child. "Ra's symbol," Amenhotep whispered, understanding flickering in his eyes. He had served in the temples in his youth before choosing the freedom of a nomad's life. He knew the significance of such an emblem. "You're someone important, aren't you? Someone who wasn't supposed to exist." The baby gazed up at him with dark, solemn eyes that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond his hours on earth. Something stirred in the old healer's heart, a feeling he had not experienced since his own son had died of fever decades ago. "Well," Amenhotep said with sudden decisiveness, "it seems the gods have seen fit to give me a son in my old age." He tucked the baby securely in the crook of his arm. "I shall call you Sahir, the awakened one, for you have awakened a part of my heart I thought long dead." As Amenhotep walked away from the acacia tree, the baby nestled against his chest. Neither noticed the figure watching from a distance, a palace guard who had been ordered to follow the concubine and ensure the child's death. He had witnessed everything, but found himself unable to complete his mission after seeing the old healer's compassion. "Perhaps the prophecy speaks not of destruction," the guard muttered to himself, "but of change." He turned back toward Thebes, already formulating the lie he would tell his masters. The child was dead, washed away by the storm, and for now, at least, that would keep Sahir safe. The desert wind picked up again, gentler now, seeming to whisper secrets across the sand. Amenhotep felt it at his back, pushing him forward, away from the great city and deeper into the embracing wilderness. The baby in his arms would need milk, care, protection, all things the old healer suddenly felt more than capable of providing. "We'll find a wet nurse in the next village," he promised the child. "And then, little Sahir, I will teach you everything I know." His eyes crinkled with a smile that had been absent from his face for far too long. "And perhaps someday you will teach me things I never imagined." As they crested a dune, the rising sun cast their long shadow across the rippled sand, one tall figure and one tiny bundle moving together toward an uncertain future, but one that suddenly felt full of possibility. 25 summers had passed since the night of the great sandstorm. On the outskirts of a small settlement that hugged the edge of the vast desert, a modest temple of mud brick and limestone stood as a haven of learning and healing. Unlike the grand temples of Karnak or Luxor, this humble sanctuary was dedicated not to a single deity, but to knowledge itself, a rare philosophy in a land where gods demanded specific worship. Inside the temple's inner chamber, Sahir bent over a freshly prepared sheet of papyrus, his steady hand moving with precision as he copied ancient medical formulas. At 25, he had grown into a man of striking appearance, tall and lean like a desert reed, with shoulders broadened by years of helping his father gather herbs in the rocky wadis. His skin had deepened to the rich copper tone of one who lived under Ra's constant gaze, and his eyes, dark as polished obsidian, reflected a sharp intelligence that often unsettled visitors. "Sahir," called a familiar voice, now grown raspy with age. "Come see what the night has brought us." Amenhotep stood in the doorway, his once black hair and beard now completely white, his face a landscape of deep wrinkles that mapped a life of laughter and hardship in equal measure. Despite approaching his 83rd year, the old healer moved with the energy of a much younger man, a fact he attributed to his daily tincture of desert herbs and his unquenchable curiosity about the world. Sahir carefully set down his reed pen and covered his ink palette. "Coming, father," he replied, his deep voice echoing against the painted walls. He followed Amenhotep through the temple's modest rooms, the healing chamber where 3 pallets usually held the sick from nearby villages, the storeroom filled with labeled pottery jars of dried herbs, minerals and powders, and finally out into the temple's rear courtyard, where a small raised platform of smooth stone served as their observatory. "Look there," Amenhotep pointed to the eastern sky, where the last stars of night still shone before dawn's approach. "The 3 sisters have shifted." Sahir followed his father's gesture, immediately spotting the unusual alignment of the 3 bright stars they had been tracking for years. "The conjunction is early this year," he noted, mentally calculating, 17 days before the expected date. "And what does that tell us?" Amenhotep asked, falling into the familiar rhythm of teacher and student. though Sahir had long ago mastered much of what the old man could teach. "The inundation will come sooner than predicted," Sahir responded confidently. "We should warn the farmers in the lowland areas to harvest what they can now." Amenhotep smiled, the pride evident in his roomy eyes. "You see why the stars matter more than the temple calendars. The priests in their grand chambers issue the same predictions year after year, while the heavens themselves speak to those willing to listen." This subtle rebelliousness against the established religious order was typical of Amenhotep, who had fled the restrictive hierarchy of Thebes' temples as a young man. He had raised Sahir with a respect for the gods, but an even deeper reverence for observable truth, a philosophy that had occasionally brought suspicious glances from traveling priests, but had earned them the trust of local villagers. "Come," the old man said, placing a gnarled hand on Sahir's shoulder. "Let's break our fast. I have matters to discuss with you." They shared a simple meal of bread, dried figs and goat cheese in the front courtyard, where the first golden rays of sunrise painted the limestone walls. Several early patients already waited nearby, a farmer with a festering cut on his arm, a young mother cradling a feverish infant, an elderly weaver with clouded eyes, their regular morning scene. "You've grown restless, my son," Amenhotep said quietly, breaking apart a fig with fingers stained permanently yellow from years of grinding turmeric and saffron. "I see it in your eyes when you think I'm not looking." Sahir glanced up, surprised at his father's perception. "The temple has been my home, my school, my world," he began carefully. "But lately, I've been dreaming of Memphis," Amenhotep finished for him. "The royal city, the place where the greatest scribes practice their art." A flash of guilt crossed Sahir's face. "I would never leave you, father." The old healer laughed, a sound like dry papyrus rustling. "Did I raise you to lie so poorly? Of course you would leave me. As you should, as you must." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Why do you think I taught you the art of writing, when most healers merely pass down their knowledge through spoken word? Why did I insist you learn not just the common script, but the sacred hieroglyphs as well?" Sahir had often wondered this, but had never dared ask directly. His father had been unusually insistent about his education, trading precious medicines to traveling scholars in exchange for scrolls and lessons in mathematics, geometry and literature, subjects far beyond what a simple healer would need. "You've been preparing me to leave," Sahir realized aloud. Amenhotep nodded, his expression suddenly solemn. "Since the day I found you beneath the acacia tree." He reached into his robe and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in faded linen. "It is time you carried this yourself." With reverent hands, Sahir unwrapped the bundle, revealing the golden amulet he had seen only a few times in his life, always kept hidden, always spoken of in whispers. The sun disk of Ra gleamed as brilliantly as the day it had been crafted, untarnished by the years. "You told me this was found with me," Sahir said, running his thumb over the intricate engravings, "but you never explained what it means." "It means you were not born to spend your life in a desert outpost, mixing poultices and reading stars with an old man." Amenhotep's eyes were suddenly fierce, with an intensity Sahir rarely saw. "Gold of this purity, with this symbol, comes from only one source in all of Egypt. The royal treasury," Sahir whispered, the implication making his heart race. "A caravan leaves for Memphis in 3 days," Amenhotep continued, ignoring Sahir's shocked expression. "I've arranged for you to travel with them as their scribe and healer. I've also written to an old friend who serves in the House of Records. He will help you find a position in the royal administration." "But the patients, your health, the temple," Sahir stammered, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in his life's course. Amenhotep waved away his concerns. "Nuru's daughter has been studying with us for 2 years now. She has the healer's gift and can assist me until I train her fully." His face softened. "As for my health, we both know I've seen more summers than most men are granted. When Anubis comes for me, I will go peacefully, knowing you are fulfilling your destiny." "And what is that destiny?" Sahir asked, the amulet suddenly feeling heavy in his palm. The old healer's eyes twinkled mysteriously. "That, my son, is for you to discover in Memphis." He pointed to the waiting patients. "Now shall we tend to our neighbors one last time together? I want to make sure you haven't forgotten how to properly lance a boil before you go impressing the royal court with your fancy writing." They worked side by side through that day and the following 2, Sahir trying to absorb every remaining bit of wisdom from his father, now seeing the old man's movements, his gentle words to patients, his clever diagnostic questions in a new light, knowing their time together was ending. On the third morning, as the trading caravan assembled at the village edge, Amenhotep helped Sahir pack his few belongings: 2 changes of simple linen clothing, a writing kit with the finest reed pens, a healer's pouch of essential remedies, and a small clay tablet covered in his father's spidery handwriting, addressed to his contact in Memphis. "Keep the amulet hidden," Amenhotep cautioned, as they embraced a final time. "Show it only when absolutely necessary, and only to someone you trust with your life." He pulled back, gripping Sahir's shoulders with surprising strength. "Listen to the stars when the temple calendars fail you. Trust your healer's instincts when surrounded by political vipers. And remember that your worth comes not from your birth, but from what you create with your own hands." Sahir swallowed the lump in his throat. "I will make you proud, father." "You already have," the old man replied, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Now go. Memphis awaits, and your story is just beginning." As the caravan wound its way north along the Nile's fertile banks, Sahir found himself torn between exhilaration and terror. The golden amulet hung concealed beneath his simple robes, a constant reminder of mysteries yet unsolved. Behind him lay the only home he had ever known. Ahead loomed Memphis, city of white walls and ancient power, where the greatest scribes in the 2 lands practiced their craft in the shadow of the royal palace. 25 years of preparation, of studying by lamplight while other young men chased village girls or learned simple trades. 25 years of his father's patient teachings, not just in medicine and writing, but in observing people, understanding motivations, recognizing truth beneath layers of deception. Why had Amenhotep been so thorough, so deliberate in his education? What had the old healer known all along about the baby he'd found abandoned in the desert? The caravan leader called for a faster pace as the midday sun climbed higher. Sahir adjusted his headcloth against the heat and squared his shoulders. Whatever awaited him in Memphis, whatever secrets his mysterious origin held, he would face it with the courage and wisdom Amenhotep had instilled in him. As if reading his thoughts, an older merchant riding beside him nodded approvingly. "First time to the great city, young scribe?" "Is it that obvious?" Sahir asked with a rueful smile. "You have the look of a man heading toward destiny," the merchant replied. "I've seen it before. Memphis has a way of testing a man's character, revealing both the gold and the dross within him." Sahir touched the hidden amulet through his robe. "Then I welcome the testing," he said softly, "for I have questions only Memphis can answer." The Nile glittered beside them, its life-giving waters carrying them inexorably toward the city of pharaohs and priests, of intrigue and opportunity. And somewhere in that great city, though Sahir couldn't know it yet, waited a young woman named Neferur, whose own destiny was about to become irrevocably entwined with his. Memphis rose from the floodplain like a dream made solid, its white limestone walls gleaming in the morning sun, temples and palaces stretching skyward as if reaching for the heavens themselves. After 15 days of travel with the merchant caravan, Sahir stood at the city's eastern gate, momentarily overwhelmed by the scale and grandeur before him. Even from outside the walls, the city hummed with life. The shouts of traders, the rumble of ox-drawn carts, the mingled scents of incense, baking bread, and the less pleasant odors of thousands of humans living in close proximity. "Impressive, isn't it?" said Karim, the merchant who had befriended Sahir during their journey. "Nothing like your little desert sanctuary. Sahir struggled to find words adequate to his feelings. "It's as if all of Egypt has been distilled into one place." Karim laughed, clapping a hand on Sahir's shoulder. "That's the poet in you talking. The scribe should be taking notes." He gestured toward the busy gate where officials checked merchants' goods and collected taxes. "Remember my offer. My brother's home has a small chamber where you could stay until you find your position. No need to rush into the unknown." Sahir smiled gratefully but shook his head. "Thank you, but I have instructions from my father." He patted the clay tablet secure in his traveling pack, a contact in the House of Records. After parting with the kindly merchant, Sahir joined the flow of people entering the great city. He clutched his meager belongings close, acutely aware of the golden amulet hidden beneath his robes. Amenhotep's friend, a man named Tammuz who had once studied medicine alongside his adoptive father, supposedly held a modest but respected position among the royal archivists. Finding him would be Sahir's first challenge. The House of Records stood not far from the royal palace complex, a substantial building of limestone and cedar, its entrance flanked by statues of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. Scribes and officials bustled in and out, many wearing the distinctive white kilts and shoulder sashes that marked them as royal administrators. Sahir approached a stern-looking doorkeeper, suddenly conscious of his travel-worn appearance and provincial accent. "I seek Ptamosi, keeper of medical records," he said, striving for confidence. "I carry a message from healer Amenhotep of the Southern Desert Temple." The doorkeeper raised a skeptical eyebrow, but gestured for Sahir to wait in a small antechamber. "If he's not with the royal physicians, he'll be in the archives," the man said, before disappearing into the building's depths. Sahir waited, taking in his surroundings with quiet amazement. Even this simple waiting area contained more wealth than his father's entire temple. Walls painted with scenes of scribes presenting records to enthroned pharaohs, floors of polished limestone, furnishings of imported cedar and ebony. What would the inner chambers be like? "Amenhotep's boy?" came a voice like dry papyrus rustling. "By the gods, you have his look about you, that same intensity in the eyes." Sahir turned to find a thin, elderly man regarding him with open curiosity. Though stooped with age, Thamos carried himself with the dignity of his position, his scribe's palette and case of reed pens marking him as actively working despite his advanced years. "Master Thamos," Sahir bowed respectfully, "my father sends his greetings and this token of his remembrance." He handed over the clay tablet which the old scribe accepted with evident emotion. 50 years since we studied together under the great physician Imhotep III, Thamos murmured, breaking the seal and scanning the tablet's contents. His eyebrows rose progressively as he read. Interesting. Most interesting." He looked up sharply. "He says you're skilled beyond your years in both medicine and writing, that you can transcribe in common script and sacred hieroglyphs with equal facility." "My father was a thorough teacher," Sahir replied modestly. "Indeed." Thamos tucked the tablet into his own carrying case. "Well, as fortune would have it, we've recently lost one of our junior medical scribes to a marriage in Thebes. There's an opening, though the pay is modest for one just starting." Sahir's heart leapt. "I would be honored to fill any position, Master Thamos. Don't be too quick to accept," the old scribe cautioned with a wry smile. "The hours are long, the work often tedious, and the senior scribes will treat you like a servant until you prove yourself." He studied Sahir's face. "Still interested?" "More than ever," Sahir affirmed. Thamos nodded approvingly. "Good. I'll arrange a test of your skills tomorrow. For tonight, you'll stay at my home. My wife will fuss over you. She's been complaining it's too quiet since our sons established their own households." By the following evening, Sahir had secured the position. His test, transcribing a complex medical treatise on liver ailments, while senior scribes deliberately created distractions around him, had impressed Thamos and the chief scribe enough to offer immediate employment. For the next 3 months, Sahir devoted himself to learning the intricate systems of the royal administration, working from sunrise until well past sunset, 6 days each week. He spent his one free day exploring Memphis, gradually mapping its districts in his mind, the prosperous neighborhoods near the palace where nobles and high officials resided, the artisans' quarter with its specialized workshops, the foreign traders section where Greeks, Nubians, and even occasional Hittite merchants established semi-permanent compounds, and the humbler areas where ordinary Egyptians lived and worked. In his 4th month of service, everything changed. The chief scribe summoned Sahir from his usual posting in the medical archives. "The palace requires a temporary scribe," the man announced without preamble. "The royal quarters need someone to transcribe a series of important decrees. 3 days' work, possibly 4. He eyed Sahir critically. "You write a clean hand and have caused no trouble. You'll go." "Me? To the royal quarters?" Sahir couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Junior scribes rarely received such assignments. "Thamos recommended you," the chief scribe said, as if that explained everything. "Report to the Western Palace Gate at sunrise tomorrow. Wear your newest kilt and sash, and for the love of all gods, trim your hair. You look like a wild man from the desert." That night, preparing his clothing and writing materials with meticulous care, Sahir felt an inexplicable tension, a sense that tomorrow marked not just an opportunity, but a turning point. He touched the golden amulet that still hung, secret and heavy, around his neck. Since arriving in Memphis, he had learned enough about royal symbols to understand its significance. It bore not just the symbol of Ra, but specific markings indicating direct connection to the royal bloodline. Why had such an object been with him when Amenhotep found him? Was there truth to the old healer's hints about Sahir's origins? The palace complex exceeded even Sahir's heightened expectations. Beyond the imposing gates lay a series of courtyards, each more splendid than the last, leading eventually to the administrative buildings adjoining the royal residence. Guided by a harried official, Sahir was installed in a small but elegant chamber, where light streamed through narrow alabaster-screened windows, illuminating a scribe's desk already equipped with fresh papyrus, ink cakes, and a water bowl for mixing. "The decrees will be dictated by the royal secretary," the official informed him. "Make no errors, speak only when spoken to, and remember that every word transcribed here is sacred as temple text." With that less than encouraging instruction, Sahir was left alone to prepare his materials. The morning passed in a blur of concentrated work. The royal secretary, a severe man of middle years who never introduced himself, arrived with an entourage of lesser officials and proceeded to dictate a series of agricultural decrees regarding the upcoming harvest. Sahir wrote swiftly and precisely, his training under Amenhotep serving him well as he captured every nuance of the formal language. When the midday break came, the secretary examined Sahir's work with narrowed eyes. Finding nothing to criticize, he merely nodded and announced they would resume after the noon meal. Sahir, not invited to join the officials for dining, remained in his temporary workspace, too nervous to seek out the servants' eating area. Instead, he stepped into the adjoining courtyard to stretch his cramped muscles and clear his mind. This smaller court featured a rectangular pool surrounded by flowering plants and shaded by carefully pruned sycamore trees, clearly a private retreat for high-ranking residents. "You don't look like one of Father's usual scribes," came a woman's voice, clear and cultured. Sahir turned, then immediately dropped into a deep bow. The young woman, who had entered the courtyard from the opposite side, wore the distinctive pleated linen gown and elaborate beaded collar of high nobility. Her black hair was styled in the intricate fashion of royal-adjacent women, adorned with gold and lapis lazuli ornaments. But it was her eyes that captured Sahir's attention, large, intelligent, and regarding him with open curiosity, rather than the dismissive glance nobles typically gave servants. "Forgive me, my lady," Sahir said, maintaining his bow. "I'm a temporary scribe assigned to the royal secretary. I shouldn't be in this courtyard." "Stand up straight. I can hardly speak to the top of your head," she commanded, though her tone held amusement rather than rebuke. When Sahir complied, she studied him with undisguised interest. "You're not from Memphis. Your accent suggests Upper Egypt, perhaps somewhere near Thebes." "A small settlement several days' journey from Thebes, yes," Sahir confirmed, surprised by her perception. "I've been in Memphis only a few months. And already writing royal decrees? You must be exceptionally skilled." She moved to the pool's edge, trailing her fingers through the water. Lotus flowers floated on the surface, their pink and white blossoms open to the midday sun. "I am Neferur, daughter of Senenmut, high priest of Ptah." Sahir bowed again, anxiety rising. The high priest of Ptah was among the most powerful men in Egypt, second only to the pharaoh himself in religious matters. His daughter would be far above Sahir's station. "I am Sahir, son of Amenhotep," he replied simply, omitting his title as junior medical scribe, insignificant in such company. "Amenhotep," she repeated, as if testing the name. "Not a common Memphis name. Was your father a healer? The name has that association." "He is," Sahir admitted, increasingly intrigued by her knowledge. Most noble ladies took little interest in etymology or professional designations. Neferur smiled, revealing perfect teeth, another sign of her privileged upbringing. "I thought so. I've studied some medical text myself, though my father considers it an inappropriate interest for a woman of my position." A shadow crossed her face. "There are many things he considers inappropriate." Before Sahir could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching voices. Neferur's expression changed instantly, the open curiosity replaced by a practiced mask of serene dignity. "You should go," she said quietly. "My attendants are returning, and they would report your presence to my father. He's very protective of his only daughter." Sahir nodded, backing toward his workroom. "It was an honor to meet you, Lady Neferur." "Perhaps we'll speak again, Sahir, son of Amenhotep," she replied, her formal tone belied by the spark of interest still visible in her eyes. "I often visit the temple archives. Scholars can speak more freely there than in palace courtyards." That brief encounter marked the beginning of what Sahir could only describe as an unlikely connection. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed with a frequency that seemed beyond coincidence. Neferure appeared at the House of Records, ostensibly researching ancient religious texts, and found reasons to engage Sahir in scholarly discussions. He, in turn, discovered that the high priest's daughter possessed a brilliance rarely encouraged in Egyptian women. She read several languages, understood medicine beyond basic household remedies, and harbored a passion for astronomical calculations that matched Sahir's own interest. Their third meeting occurred in the temple library, where tall papyrus shelves created a labyrinth of knowledge. Hidden between cases of ancient medical texts, they spoke for nearly an hour, moving from formal pleasantries to genuine intellectual exchange. "My tutors never explained why certain stars move differently than others," Neferure confessed, frustration evident in her voice. "They simply said that is the will of the gods, as if questions were themselves disrespectful." "My father," Sahir began, then caught himself. "My father believes that understanding the mechanisms of nature honors the gods rather than defies them. He taught me to track the wandering stars through their cycles." Neferure leaned closer, her scent of lotus and myrrh momentarily distracting him. "You must tell me more. My astronomical tutor was dismissed after my father found him teaching me mathematical calculations instead of just the basic observational calendar. Perhaps I could show you?" Sahir offered, immediately questioning his boldness. "There are observation platforms in the older section of the temple complex where few people go after dark." It was dangerously close to suggesting a private meeting with the daughter of one of Egypt's most powerful men. Sahir expected outrage, or at minimum, a polite rebuff. Instead, Neferure's eyes lit with excitement. "Tomorrow night," she whispered. "I can arrange to visit my aunt in the temple complex for evening prayers. My attendants always allow me privacy for meditation afterward." Their nighttime meeting beneath the stars shifted something fundamental between them, away from the constraints of the palace. With only the vast Egyptian sky as witness, they spoke as equals, two minds united in curiosity about the world. Sahir showed her how to track the movements of planets, explained the calculations his father had taught him for predicting celestial events. "It's beautiful," Neferure breathed, watching as Sahir used a stick to draw diagrams in a patch of sand they'd smoothed for the purpose. "All these patterns, these perfect mathematical relationships, it makes the universe seem both more mysterious and more comprehensible simultaneously." "That's exactly how my father described it," Sahir replied, surprised by the parallel. In the soft moonlight, with her formal wig removed and her natural hair falling in simple braids, Neferure looked younger, more vulnerable, and impossibly beautiful. She must have sensed his gaze, for she turned toward him, their faces suddenly close in the darkness. "You speak of your father with such reverence. Mine speaks only of duty, of maintaining traditions. He never shares knowledge for its own joy." "All fathers are different," Sahir said carefully, aware they were discussing the high priest of Ptah, a man who could have him executed with a word. "Yes, but some fathers see their children as extensions of themselves, vessels for their ambitions." Her voice had grown soft, intimate in the darkness. "Others, like yours it seems, view their children as beings with their own path to walk." When she placed her hand over his, the contact sent a jolt through Sahir's body, unlike anything he'd experienced. It was madness. She was so far above his station that even this innocent touch could be punishable, yet he couldn't bring himself to pull away. "We should meet again," Neferure whispered, her fingers still resting on his. "There's a small garden behind the temple of Hathor where scholars sometimes gather. It would not seem unusual for us to speak there." And so began a pattern of carefully orchestrated encounters, always in public spaces, but often in quiet corners where conversation could flow freely. Each meeting deepened their connection, revealing new facets of shared interests and complementary perspectives. Sahir found himself drawn not just to Neferure's beauty, which was considerable, but to her quick mind, her compassion for others despite her privileged upbringing, and her barely concealed frustration with the constraints placed upon her as a highborn woman. For her part, Neferure seemed to find in Sahir something equally compelling, perhaps the freedom of thought his unusual upbringing had fostered, or his combination of scholarly knowledge with practical healing skills. "Are you cross boundaries?" she told him once as they examined an ancient medical papyrus together in the temple library. "You're trained as both healer and scribe. You understand both practical medicine and astronomical theory. You respect tradition without being enslaved by it." Her fingers brushed his as she turned a papyrus sheet. "Do you know how rare that is in Memphis? Everyone else fits neatly into their assigned role, never questioning, never reaching beyond. 6 months after their first meeting, Sahir received an unexpected summons. His presence was requested at a gathering of scholars in the high priest's private residence. Such invitations were typically reserved for senior scribes and respected teachers, not junior archivists barely established in Memphis. The high priest's daughter mentioned your astronomical calculations to her father, Thamos explained when Sahir sought his advice. Apparently, she was impressed by your methods for predicting the Nile's inundation based on stellar observations. Sahir felt a flush of both pride and anxiety. I simply shared what my father taught me. Well, those teachings have caught important attention, Thamos said, his expression unreadable. Be careful, young Sahir. The high priest does not invite obscure scribes to his home without purpose. The gathering proved to be both less and more than Sahir had anticipated. Fewer than 20 men attended, not the grand assembly he had feared, but each was a person of significant influence. Priests of various rankings, royal astronomers, master scribes, and 2 nobles known to advise the pharaoh directly. Sahir, by far the youngest and lowest in rank, remained quiet initially, observing the complex social dynamics at play. The high priest himself, Senenmut, proved a commanding presence, tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60-plus years, with penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone constantly. He showed little of the warmth or curiosity that characterized his daughter, instead projecting calculated authority with every gesture. As the evening progressed, the discussion turned to astronomical matters, specifically the upcoming seasonal predictions that would guide agricultural planning throughout the kingdom. When several royal astronomers presented contradicting calculations, Senenmut unexpectedly turned to Sahir. My daughter tells me you have an unusual method for resolving such discrepancies, he said, his deep voice silencing all other conversation. Enlighten us, young scribe. All eyes turned to Sahir. In that moment, he felt the weight of Amenhotep's teachings, the responsibility to honor the knowledge passed to him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward and began to explain the observation system his father had developed, a method that incorporated both traditional Egyptian calendrical wisdom and practical star-tracking techniques. As he spoke, Sahir became aware of Neferura watching from behind a partly opened door. Women, even the high priest's daughter, were not officially permitted at such gatherings, but she had clearly arranged to observe. Her presence gave him courage, and he finished his explanation with more confidence than he'd begun. A moment of silence followed, then an elderly astronomer nodded grudgingly. The boy's method has merit. It explains the anomalies we've been seeing in the recent cycles. Senenmut studied Sahir with new interest. Where did you study such techniques? They're not taught in Memphis or Thebes. My father is a healer and scholar in a small temple near Thebes, Sahir replied carefully. He combined knowledge from many sources over his lifetime. Interesting. The high priest stroked his ceremonial beard thoughtfully. You will work with my astronomers to implement this method for the coming season's predictions. If successful, there may be a more permanent position for you. It was a remarkable opportunity, far beyond what a scribe of Sahir's limited experience could normally hope for. Yet, as he bowed his acceptance, he caught Neferura's gaze across the room. The mixture of pride and warning in her eyes suggested she understood something he did not, that her father's interest was double-edged, an opportunity laced with danger. Later that night, as servants cleared away the remains of the scholarly feast, Sahir found himself momentarily alone in a small antechamber. A soft footfall alerted him to Neferura's presence moments before she appeared. You impressed them all, she said without preamble, her voice low to avoid being overheard. Especially my father. I should thank you for mentioning my work to him, Sahir replied, equally quiet. Neferura shook her head, her expression troubled. My father doesn't offer opportunities without purpose, Sahir. He's interested in you now, which means he'll investigate everything about you. Her eyes met his directly. Is there anything in your past that could be problematic? The weight of the golden amulet seemed suddenly heavier against Sahir's chest. He thought of Amenhotep's warnings, of the mystery surrounding his birth, of the meaning behind the royal symbol he carried. Nothing I'm aware of, he said carefully, unwilling to lie directly to her. Neferura studied his face, clearly sensing his evasion. Be careful, Sahir, she whispered. I've brought you into a dangerous game by mentioning your name to my father. The scholars' circle in Memphis is like a nest of cobras, seemingly calm until someone makes an unexpected move. Why did you do it then? He asked, genuinely curious. Why bring me to your father's attention? Her expression softened, vulnerability showing through her usual composed facade. Because your mind deserves recognition. Because knowledge should matter more than birth or position. She hesitated, then added more softly, and because I wanted a reason to see you in my father's house, where we might speak without raising suspicions. The admission hung between them, charged with implications neither dared voice directly. Sahir knew with sudden clarity that whatever had been growing between them, this connection of minds and perhaps hearts, was as forbidden as it was powerful. She was the daughter of the high priest, likely promised since childhood to some nobleman or prince. He was a scribe of uncertain birth, his position precarious at best. Yet as her hand brushed his in passing, lingering a moment longer than propriety allowed, Sahir felt something dangerous and wonderful unfurl within his chest, something that had nothing to do with ambition or advancement, and everything to do with the woman before him, with her brilliant mind and questioning spirit, trapped within the gilded cage of her position. We should be more careful now, not less, Neferure murmured, already backing toward the door. Eyes will be watching you, watching us both. I understand, Sahir replied, though in truth he understood only that something profound had shifted, in his position in Memphis, in his relationship with the high priest's daughter, and in the trajectory of his carefully planned life. As he left the high priest's residence that night, stars gleaming overhead in familiar patterns, Sahir felt both exhilarated and uneasy. Amenhotep had prepared him for many challenges, but not for this, not for the dangerous complexities of court politics, and certainly not for the even more dangerous feeling taking root in his heart whenever Neferure was near. The weeks following Sahir's unexpected triumph at the high priest's gathering brought changes that swept through his life like the seasonal winds. His reassignment from the House of Records to the Temple of Ptah's astronomical division elevated his status considerably. No longer just another junior scribe hunched over medical texts, he now worked directly with the kingdom's most respected stargazers, his desert-learned methods slowly gaining acceptance among men who had spent decades studying celestial movements. They're calling you the desert oracle behind your back, Thamos told him one evening, as they shared a simple meal in the old scribe's modest home. The elderly man had become something of a surrogate father to Sahir in Memphis, offering guidance through the treacherous waters of court politics. It's not entirely a compliment, Sahir sighed, breaking off a piece of bread. I've noticed the resentment, particularly from Nakhtatum. The royal astronomer has held his position for 30 years, Thamos replied. Then you arrive, barely past your 25th summer, and suggest his calculations have been flawed for decades. He chuckled dryly. I'm surprised he hasn't tried to poison you yet. That's not funny, Sahir said, though he smiled despite himself. It wasn't meant to be. Thamos' expression turned serious. You've risen too quickly, Sahir. It's drawing attention, the kind that brings both opportunity and danger. Indeed, Sahir had begun to notice the shifting attitudes around him. Junior scribes who had previously treated him as an equal now showed deference tinged with envy. Senior officials who had never acknowledged his existence suddenly knew his name. Even the merchants at the market quoted him different prices, sometimes higher, assuming new wealth, sometimes lower, seeking future favor. Most concerning were the nobles. 3 in particular had taken an interest in the young astronomer whose methods had so impressed the high priest. Lord Amenemhat, a middle-aged cousin of the pharaoh, had begun inviting Sahir to informal gatherings at his riverside villa. Your astronomical insights could have applications beyond agriculture, he'd suggested during their last meeting, his voice casual, though his eyes were sharp. The military campaigns to our south, for instance, might benefit from more accurate seasonal predictions. Lady Tai, a wealthy widow whose family controlled vast tracts of farmland in the Delta region, had taken to visiting the Temple of Ptah while Sahir worked. Such a brilliant young man, she would say, loud enough for others to hear, her painted eyes lingering on him. My late husband always said talent should be nurtured and rewarded. Her invitations to private dinners had grown increasingly difficult to politely refuse. Most troubling was General Mayhen, commander of the Pharaoh's personal guard, and a man known for his ruthless ambition. Unlike the others, he made no pretense of interest in astronomy. I value men who solve problems, he had stated bluntly during an unexpected visit to Sahir's work chamber. Men who see patterns others miss. His assessment of Sahir had felt like a merchant appraising livestock. You've become a resource to be acquired, Sahir, Thamos warned. These powerful people don't seek your friendship. They seek to harness your abilities for their own advancement. What should I do? Sahir asked, genuinely uncertain. His upbringing in the remote desert temple had poorly prepared him for these complex social maneuvers. But Amos stroked his thin beard thoughtfully. Maintain respectful distance from all factions. Commit to none. And remember that in Memphis, words are like the Nile's current. What seems calm on the surface may harbor dangerous undertows. Sahir followed this advice as best he could, but his new position made complete neutrality impossible. His work required regular meetings with high officials, including the high priest himself. Each such encounter felt like navigating a maze where the walls shifted unpredictably. 2 months into his new role, Sahir achieved a significant breakthrough. Using his combined knowledge of traditional Egyptian astronomical tables and the observational methods learned from Amenhotep, he developed a more accurate system for predicting the precise timing of the Nile's annual flood, information crucial for agricultural planning throughout the kingdom. The high priest Senenmut, impressed by the preliminary results, arranged for Sahir to present his findings to an assembly of temple officials, noble landowners, and royal administrators. It would be the most significant moment of his career thus far. "You will present your system the day after tomorrow," Senenmut informed him. "The pharaoh's vizier himself will attend." His penetrating gaze settled on Sahir. "Do not disappoint me, young scribe. Much rides on this for both of us." The night before his presentation, Sahir worked late in the temple observatory, checking and rechecking his calculations. The stars above Memphis seemed particularly brilliant, as if offering their silent support. Or perhaps, he thought wryly, they were simply indifferent to the human dramas unfolding beneath them. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," came a familiar voice from the observatory entrance. "There are too many who would benefit from your failure tomorrow." Sahir turned to find Neferua standing in the doorway, a simple linen cloak concealing her identity from casual observers. In the week since the gathering at her father's house, they had maintained a careful distance in public, their interactions limited to brief scholarly exchanges with others present. This private visit represented a significant risk. "My lady," Sahir said, his heartbeat quickening, "it's dangerous for you to be here. More dangerous for you to be unguarded before your presentation." She moved closer, her expression troubled. "I've heard whispers, Sahir. Not everyone celebrates your success. Your father? My father sees you as a useful tool in his ongoing competition with the other temples." Her directness was startling. "He believes your methods will bring prestige to the Temple of Ptah and by extension to him." "And you?" Sahir asked quietly. "How do you see me?" In the candlelight, her face softened. "As the only person in Memphis who speaks to me as a thinking being rather than a decorative possession." She stepped closer still. "As someone who sees patterns not just in the stars, but in the hearts of people." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Sahir was acutely aware of their solitude, of how close she stood, of the impropriety of this entire encounter. "Tomorrow is important," she continued, her voice lower. "If you succeed, your position will be more secure. But success also makes you more valuable, and therefore more of a target." From within her cloak, she withdrew a small object. "Take this. It belonged to my mother." Sahir accepted the offering, a small amulet carved from lapis lazuli depicting the goddess Seshat, patroness of writing and astronomy. "I can't accept such a valuable gift," he protested. "It's not valuable in gold," Neferua replied, "but in protection." My mother believed it guided her thoughts toward truth. Her fingers brushed his as she closed his hand around the amulet. "Wear it tomorrow, hidden beneath your robes, next to your heart." "How did you know I would be here tonight?" Sahir asked, sudden suspicion breaking through his emotional response to her presence. Neferua's smile held secrets. "I have my own sources of information in Memphis. Not everyone in my father's household is loyal only to him." She stepped back toward the door. "I should go. Dawn comes early, and we must both be prepared for tomorrow's challenges." "Thank you," Sahir said, raising the amulet. "Not just for this, but for your warning." She paused at the threshold. "Be brilliant tomorrow, Sahir, but not so brilliant that you become irreplaceable." With that cryptic advice, she was gone, the soft sound of her sandals fading into the temple's nighttime silence. The presentation chamber was crowded beyond Sahir's expectations. Not only had the promised officials arrived, but it seemed every noble with interest in agricultural matters had found reason to attend. Sahir recognized faces from various factions of the court, supporters of the high priest, adherents of rival temples, military officers, royal administrators. In the center, seated on an elevated chair, was the vizier himself, the pharaoh's chief minister, and the second most powerful man in Egypt. Senenmut stood beside Sahir as the chamber quieted. "Remember," the high priest murmured, "clarity above all. These men understand power, not complex astronomical theories." Sahir nodded, touching the hidden place where two amulets now rested against his skin, the golden sun disk of his mysterious birth and Neferura's lapis lazuli goddess. Drawing a deep breath, he began his presentation. He had prepared carefully, using clear language and practical examples rather than theoretical astronomy. He showed how traditional prediction methods sometimes failed due to overlooking subtle stellar shifts, then demonstrated how his integrated approach accounted for these variations. Using data from previous years, he proved how his system would have more accurately predicted the last 3 flood cycles, information that could have saved thousands of grain stores and prevented localized famines. With this method, Sahir concluded, we can provide farmers in both Upper and Lower Egypt with more precise planting guidance. The economic benefits would be substantial: increased yields, better resource allocation, and greater tax revenues for the royal treasury. That last point, added at Senenmut's suggestion, drew appreciative murmurs from the royal officials. The vizier himself leaned forward, his lined face thoughtful. "Impressive work for one so young," the vizier said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in royal service. "Yet I wonder, how does a scribe from a minor desert temple acquire such sophisticated astronomical knowledge that has apparently eluded our established astronomers for generations?" The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Sahir was being asked to explain not just his methods but himself, his unexpected expertise, his rapid rise, his very presence in this chamber of power. Before Sahir could respond, Senenmut stepped forward. "I have investigated this matter, Lord Vizier. The young man's father is known in the southern regions as a healer of rare skill, educated in both Egyptian and foreign medical traditions. The astronomical knowledge was apparently acquired through extensive observation in the clear desert skies, away from city haze and temple restrictions." It was a plausible explanation, yet Sahir noted how the vizier's eyes narrowed slightly, unconvinced. Other faces in the chamber reflected similar skepticism, particularly the royal astronomer Nakht Atum, whose expression had darkened progressively throughout the presentation. "Perhaps," the vizier replied, "we should have this desert healer brought to Memphis to share his other insights. A man of such wisdom should not remain hidden in the provinces." Sahir felt a chill at the suggestion. Amenhotep was elderly now, his health increasingly fragile. A journey to Memphis, even if politically safe, might prove physically dangerous. "My father is advanced in years, Lord Vizier," Sahir said carefully. "His knowledge lives on through his teachings to me and others." "How convenient," came a new voice, sharp, cutting. Nakht Atum had risen from his seat, his ceremonial astronomer's staff gripped tightly. A mysterious source of wisdom, too elderly to be questioned. Meanwhile, this young man appears from nowhere, challenges established practices, and is immediately elevated to positions of influence. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Sahir saw heads nodding, caught whispered comments about desert upstarts and proper channels of advancement. "Do you question the high priest's judgment in this matter?" Senenmut asked, his voice dangerously soft. Nakht Atum bowed stiffly. "Never, Most Holy One. I merely suggest that innovations of such significance require thorough verification. Perhaps a committee of established astronomers should review these methods before implementation." It was a clever move, appearing reasonable while effectively blocking Sahir's system from immediate adoption. Such a committee, dominated by traditionalists like Nakht Atum, would delay approval for months, possibly years. The vizier nodded thoughtfully. A prudent suggestion. New methods, however promising, must be thoroughly examined before affecting kingdom-wide agricultural planning. Sahir felt the opportunity slipping away. Months of work would disappear into the slow machinations of temple bureaucracy. He touched the amulets beneath his robe, drawing courage, and stepped forward. "Lord Vizier, if I may?" he began, waiting for the slight nod of permission. "These methods can be verified without delay. The stars themselves will prove their accuracy or their failure within the next 30 days. A surprised silence fell. Sahir continued, his voice gaining strength. Using traditional calculations, the royal astronomers have predicted the Nile's initial rise will begin 63 days from today. My system indicates it will begin in 34 days. A significant difference. Gasps and mutters filled the chamber. Such a dramatic divergence from official predictions was unprecedented. This is absurd, Naktatum protested. The sacred calculations have served Egypt for centuries, and they will continue to serve Egypt, Sahir replied calmly. I propose not replacing them, but enhancing them. As for verification, we need only wait 34 days. If the Nile begins its rise, then my methods prove their worth. If not, I withdraw them completely. The vizier's weathered face showed a flicker of respect. You stake your reputation on this specific prediction? I do, Lord Vizier. Senenmut, looking briefly startled by Sahir's boldness, quickly composed himself. The Temple of Ptah supports this demonstration. 34 days is a small delay for certainty. After a moment's consideration, the vizier nodded. Very well. In 34 days we shall have our answer. He rose, signaling the meeting's end. Until then, young scribe, I suggest you pray to whatever gods guided your calculations. You have placed yourself in a precarious position. As the chamber emptied, reactions to Sahir's gamble varied visibly across faces, some impressed by his confidence, others clearly hoping for his humiliation. Naktatum passed close by, pausing just long enough to whisper, "The desert breeds madmen who see visions in the heat. Soon all of Memphis will know you for what you are." When only Senenmut remained, the high priest gripped Sahir's shoulder with surprising strength. "That was either brilliance or folly," he said, his expression unreadable. "If you're proven wrong, not even my protection will save your position." "And if I'm right?" Sahir asked. The high priest's mouth curved in a cold smile. "Then your value increases substantially. To me and to others with interest in accurate predictions." His grip tightened momentarily. "Remember who elevated you from obscurity, Sahir. Loyalty is a commodity I value even more than astronomical skill." Left alone in the now empty chamber, Sahir finally allowed his confident facade to slip. The 34-day prediction was accurate. Of that he had no doubt. Amenhotep's methods, refined over decades of desert observations, had never failed. But Sahir hadn't anticipated needing to stake everything on a single dramatic demonstration. He had just transformed himself from an interesting newcomer to either a future asset of immense value or a soon-to-be disgraced fraud. That evening, returning to his modest quarters in the scribe's residence, Sahir found a small ceramic jar by his door, a type commonly used for medicines or cosmetics. No note accompanied it. Cautious after the day's events, he examined it carefully before removing the sealed cap. Inside was a paste of dried and crushed herbs that released a bitter scent when he cautiously touched it with a fingertip. "I wouldn't taste that if I were you," came Tamos's voice from the shadowed hallway. The elderly scribe emerged, his face grave. "Not unless a painful death appeals to you." Sahir nearly dropped the jar. "Poison? A particularly nasty variety," Tamos confirmed, taking the container and resealing it. "Made from desert plants that cause the throat to swell closed. You wouldn't have survived until morning." The reality of his situation struck Sahir with new force. His astronomical challenge wasn't just a scholarly dispute, it had become a matter of life and death. Who would... "The list of possibilities is unfortunately long," Tamos interrupted. "You've become too visible, too quickly. The royal astronomer fears replacement, several nobles covet your predictive abilities for their own advantage, and various temple factions worry about the implications of your methods." "What should I do?" Sahir asked, eyeing the sealed jar with new horror. Tamos sighed heavily. "For tonight you'll stay at my home. Tomorrow we'll arrange more secure quarters for you within the temple complex." He patted Sahir's shoulder. "And perhaps you should consider eating only what you prepare yourself until this 34-day trial is concluded." Over the following weeks, Sahir's life transformed into a strange combination of heightened status and constant vigilance. Senenmut, with his own reputation now tied to Sahir's prediction, arranged for him to be housed in a small but comfortable chamber within the Temple of Ptah's inner complex. The increased security this provided came with increased isolation. Sahir found himself working alone most days, other astronomers suddenly too busy with their own projects to collaborate. Word of his bold challenge had spread throughout Memphis. When he ventured into the city, he noticed people watching him, conversations pausing as he passed. Some merchants refused to serve him, fearing association with a potential fraud. Others offered extravagant discounts, hoping to curry favor with someone who might soon have the vizier's ear. 14 days before the predicted inundation, Sahir received an unexpected invitation to Lord Amenemhat's estate, a request for a private consultation regarding agricultural planning for the noble's extensive lands. Thamos advised caution. "He was notably silent during your presentation," the old scribe observed, "neither supporting nor opposing you. Now he seeks private counsel. It suggests he's hedging his bets, preparing to benefit from your prediction if accurate while maintaining distance if you fail." Despite these concerns, declining was politically difficult. Amenemhat's cousinship to the pharaoh made him too powerful to offend casually. Sahir agreed to attend, but prepared carefully, declining food and drink upon arrival under the pretense of religious observance. The noble's estate was magnificent, a sprawling complex of gardens, pools, and elegant buildings situated on a rise overlooking the Nile. Servants guided Sahir through courtyards filled with exotic plants from distant lands, past bubbling fountains that defied the Egyptian heat, to a shaded pavilion where Lord Amenemhat reclined on cushioned benches. "The rising astronomer honors my humble home," the noble said, his tone friendly, though his eyes remained calculating. "I've been following your work with great interest." "You honor me with your attention, my lord," Sahir replied with appropriate deference. Amenemhat waved away the formality. "Let us speak plainly. Your 34-day prediction has created quite a stir in court circles. Wagers are being placed on the outcome." He smiled thinly. "The odds favor your failure, I'm afraid." "The Nile will reveal the truth soon enough," Sahir said simply. "Indeed." The noble studied him thoughtfully. "What interests me, young Sahir, is not whether your prediction proves accurate, though that would be remarkable, but what such accuracy would imply. My lord, it would suggest you possess knowledge beyond our established institutions." Amenemhat leaned forward, his voice dropping confidentially. "Knowledge that could be valuable in many contexts beyond agriculture. Military campaigns, for instance, depend heavily on seasonal timing. Trade expeditions likewise." Sahir understood immediately. The noble was probing his potential usefulness for matters far beyond temple astronomy. "My methods are solely focused on the Nile's inundation cycle, my lord. Their wider application would require substantial adaptation." "Of course," Amenemhat smiled. "But adaptation is possible with proper support and protection." He paused meaningfully. "The high priest is not the only powerful patron available in Memphis. Some would argue not even the most influential. The implied offer hung in the air between them, an alternative allegiance away from Senenmut's control. Before Sahir could formulate a properly ambiguous response, they were interrupted by the arrival of new guests. "Ah, General Mayhem joins us." Amenemhat rose, extending his hands in greeting. "And Lady Tai as well, what a pleasant surprise." Sahir stiffened. The accidental encounter with the two other nobles who had shown interest in his abilities seemed suspiciously coordinated. He found himself at the center of a triangle of power. 3 influential figures, each with their own agenda, now converging around him. General Mayhem's hard face showed no warmth as he acknowledged Sahir with a curt nod. "The stargazer, who challenges the ancient wisdom. We meet again." Lady Tia, by contrast, offered a dazzling smile. "My dear Sahir," she purred, as if they were old friends. "I've been telling everyone who'll listen about your brilliant methods. Such a shame the temples are so resistant to innovation." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in court intrigue. Never did any of the 3 nobles directly propose an alliance or make explicit offers. Instead, they spoke of shared interests and mutual benefits, of limitations of temple service and opportunities beyond traditional paths. Through it all, Sahir maintained careful neutrality, neither committing to nor rejecting their implied overtures. As the meeting concluded and Sahir prepared to depart, General Mayhem detained him briefly at the estate's entrance. The military man's scarred face was unreadable as he spoke in low tones. "You navigate treacherous waters well for a desert-born scribe. But remember, in Memphis, neutrality is rarely a sustainable position. Eventually, all must choose their allegiance." "I serve truth and knowledge, General," Sahir replied carefully. Mayhem's laugh was short and harsh. "Noble sentiments. Let's see if they protect you when the real games begin." He stepped closer, his voice dropping further. "The High Priest's daughter has shown unusual interest in your career. Take care that personal feelings don't cloud your judgment." when the time comes to make practical choices. The mention of Pharaoh'S sent a chill through Sahir. That Mayhen would reference her suggested the connection between them, however carefully concealed, had not gone unnoticed. Lady Pharaoh has been kind enough to support scholarly work at the temple, Sahir responded, keeping his voice steady. Of course, Mayhen smiled thinly. Her scholarly interests are well known, as is her father's ambition to secure advantageous connections through her eventual marriage. The implication was clear and troubling. If Mayhen knew of Pharaoh's interest in Sahir, others likely did as well, including, potentially, Senenmut himself. Returning to the temple that evening, Sahir found himself more unsettled than ever. The political games surrounding him were growing more complex by the day, with his astronomical prediction serving as merely the opening gambit in a larger power struggle. He had not seen Pharaoh since before his presentation. Her movements had been restricted following some disagreement with her father, according to temple gossip. Now, with Mayhen's veiled warning echoing in his mind, Sahir worried their connection might place her in an untenable position. 2 nights later, unable to sleep despite the late hour, Sahir stood on the temple's observation platform, consulting his astronomical tables by lamplight. The stars above offered familiar comfort, constant, predictable, untouched by human scheming. "I thought I might find you here," came a soft voice from the shadows. Sahir turned quickly, his heart leaping in recognition. "Pharaoh, how did you—" "The temple guards know me well enough," she said, stepping into the pool of lamplight. "And I've brought offerings for the midnight rituals." She gestured to the small basket she carried, filled with flowers and incense. No one questions the high priest's daughter performing proper devotions. Despite the circumstances, Sahir couldn't help but smile. "You've become quite the strategist." "Necessity breeds cunning," she replied, but her answering smile faded quickly. "I can't stay long. My father has been watching me more closely since your presentation. He suspects I have undue interest in your success." "Is he angry?" "Not angry. Calculating." She set down her basket and moved closer. "My father sees all relationships as potential alliances or liabilities. Right now, he's trying to determine which category you fall into." "And which does he believe?" Sahir asked quietly. "He's undecided." Pharaoh's eyes reflected the lamplight, serious and concerned. "But others at court are drawing their own conclusions about your rapid rise and my apparent advocacy. General Mayhen in particular has been asking questions." Sahir nodded grimly. "He made certain implications when I saw him at Lord Amenemhat's estate." Alarm flashed across her face. "You met with Amenemhat? And Mayhen was there?" "When?" "2 days ago. Lady Tia as well." "This is worse than I feared," Pharaoh said, her voice tight with worry. "They're positioning themselves around you, Sahir, testing where your loyalties might lie if your prediction proves correct." "I've committed to nothing," he assured her. "It doesn't matter. The appearance of divided loyalty would be enough for my father to view you as a threat rather than an asset." She gripped his arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. "Listen to me carefully. If the Nile rises as you've predicted, you must immediately and publicly credit the Temple of Ptah's guidance. Give my father all recognition for supporting your work. Make it impossible for these nobles to separate you from temple authority." Sahir studied her face, reading the genuine fear behind her composed expression. "You're trying to protect me," he realized aloud. "Someone must," she replied simply. "You don't fully understand what you've stumbled into, Sahir. These power struggles have destroyed men far more established than yourself." He covered her hand with his own. "And what about you? Aren't you at risk as well, being here like this?" Her smile turned sad. "I've lived with risk since birth. The daughter of the high priest is always a piece on the game board, never a player." She withdrew her hand reluctantly. "But lately I've begun to question whether the game itself might be played differently." Before Sahir could respond, a distant sound, the changing of the temple guards, made them both tense. "I must go," Pharaoh whispered. "Whatever happens with your prediction, be careful of those who suddenly offer friendship. In Memphis, every gift carries obligation." She gathered her basket of offerings and moved toward the stairs, then paused, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Something beyond concern, beyond friendship, yet carefully contained. "The Nile will rise exactly when you've said it will," she stated with unexpected certainty. "I've checked your calculations myself. They're flawless." With that declaration of faith, she disappeared into the darkness, leaving Sahir to wonder at the complexities of both astronomy and the human heart. The days crawled by with excruciating slowness, As the predicted date approached, Sahir found himself the center of increasing attention. Scribes who had previously ignored him now sought his insights on unrelated matters. Temple officials who had regarded him with suspicion suddenly included him in ceremonial functions. Even Nakat Atum, the royal astronomer, made a point of publicly wishing him well, though the wish came with a smile that suggested he anticipated anything but success. 3 days before the predicted inundation, a royal messenger arrived at the Temple of Ptah. The vizier requested Sahir's presence at the Nilometer, the ancient stone structure used to measure the river's height during the critical flood season. He would join a small group of officials for daily observations until either the river began its rise or the prediction was proven false. A mixed blessing, Tamos commented when Sahir shared the news. Your validation or failure will have official witnesses of the highest rank. The vizier takes this seriously indeed. The observation group proved to be carefully balanced. 2 priests from the Temple of Ptah representing Senenmut's interests, 3 royal officials including a record keeper, Nakt Atum representing the traditional astronomical authorities, and 2 nobles, Lord Amenemhat and surprisingly General Mayhen, presumably attending as interested parties with significant agricultural holdings. Each morning before dawn, this small assembly gathered at the Nilometer, where officiating priests took precise measurements of the river's height. Each day, the readings showed no significant change. Each day, Naktatum's smile grew more pronounced, while Senenmut's representatives became increasingly tense. On the 33rd day, 1 day before Sahir's predicted inundation, the river remained stubbornly at its normal level. As the group prepared to disperse until the following morning, General Mayhen approached Sahir. An impressive display of confidence, maintaining your composure as your career crumbles, the military man remarked, his tone almost admiring. When tomorrow passes without change, what will you do? The sun has not yet set on the 34th day, General, Sahir replied evenly. Mayhen smiled thinly. True enough, but when it does, remember my words about choosing allegiances wisely. The high priest discards failed tools without sentiment. Others might see potential where he sees only disappointment. That evening, Sahir returned to the temple in a state of controlled tension. His calculations were correct. He remained certain of that. Yet the river showed no signs of the subtle changes that typically preceded the initial rise. Had he missed some crucial factor? Had his adaptation of Amenhotep's methods to the Memphis region introduced an error? Seeking solitude to review his work one final time, Sahir climbed to the temple's highest observation platform. The setting sun painted the distant river a molten gold, the same color as the amulet that hung against his chest, the symbol of a heritage he still barely understood. Troubled thoughts before your moment of triumph, came Senenmut's voice, startling Sahir from his reverie. The high priest approached with measured steps, his ceremonial robes replaced by simpler attire. Without his formal headpiece and broad collar, he looked older, the lines of calculation more evident on his face. Forgive me, most holy one, Sahir said, bowing deeply. I didn't expect anyone else here at this hour. I often come to this spot when decisions weigh heavily, Senenmut replied, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The perspective helps clarify priorities. He turned to Sahir, studying him with those penetrating eyes. Tomorrow will define your future in Memphis, young astronomer. Are you prepared for either outcome? I believe in my calculations, Sahir answered carefully. Belief is the province of priests, not astronomers, Senenmut countered. We deal in certainties and evidence. He moved closer, lowering his voice though no one else was present. Tell me truthfully, if the river fails to rise tomorrow, what explanation will you offer? The question felt like a test, though of what? Sahir wasn't entirely sure. If I'm wrong, he said slowly, I will acknowledge the error, examine my methods for flaws, and submit myself to whatever consequences are deemed appropriate. A diplomatic answer. Senenmut's mouth curved in a small, cold smile. But not the answer of a man who truly believes himself correct. He turned away, gazing again toward the distant Nile. My daughter speaks highly of your integrity, Sahir. She has taken an unusual interest in your work. Some might consider that interest inappropriate. Sahir felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. Lady Neferur has honored me with her scholarly attention. Her understanding of astronomical principles is remarkable for a woman, Senenmut finished, his tone sharp. Yes, my daughter has always reached beyond her assigned place, a trait both admirable and troublesome in equal measure. He fixed Sahir with a penetrating stare. Her future is predetermined, you understand. Arrangements of great significance depend on her making an appropriate marriage. The implication hung in the air between them. Sahir bowed his head in acknowledgement, not trusting himself to speak. I have indulged her intellectual interests because they harm no one, Senenmut continued. But attachments that threaten political alliances cannot be permitted, no matter how sincere they might be. I understand my place, Most Holy One, Sahir managed, the words bitter in his mouth. Do you? Senenmut asked softly. I wonder. You've shown remarkable ambition for a provincial scribe. From obscurity to the vizier's attention in less than a year. Quite a journey. He stepped closer, his voice dropping further. Such rapid advancement suggests either extraordinary talent or extraordinary assistance, perhaps both. Before Sahir could respond, Senenmut reached out unexpectedly, his fingers closing around something beneath Sahir's robe. With a quick movement, he withdrew the lapis lazuli amulet, Neferura's gift, from its hiding place. A Seishat's symbol, Senenmut observed, turning the small carved goddess in his palm. My late wife's protective amulet. How curious to find it around your neck. Sahir remained silent, unable to offer any explanation that wouldn't implicate Neferura. The high priest studied the amulet a moment longer, then surprisingly returned it to Sahir. My daughter believes in you, he said simply. For her sake, I hope that belief is justified. Tomorrow we shall know. He turned to leave, then paused. One final thing, Sahir. Should your prediction prove accurate, remember that success in Memphis depends not only on being right, but on allowing the right people to claim credit for your insights. With that ambiguous advice, Senenmut departed, leaving Sahir alone with the setting sun, and a growing sense that forces beyond his control were converging around him. The high priest clearly suspected some attachment. Neferura stood rigid as her father delivered the news. General Mayhan has formally requested your hand. The arrangement benefits us all. Her heart sank. The general was known for his cruelty. Father, please, she began. Enough. This isn't about your happiness. It's about our family's position. Later, alone in her chamber, Neferura clutched Sahir's letter. His prediction had proven true, making him celebrated throughout Memphis. I cannot marry Mayhan, she whispered to the empty room. Not when my heart belongs to another. But royal blood carried obligations heavier than love. Sahir received an urgent message from his adoptive father. Amenhotep had arrived in Memphis, despite his frail health. My son, the old healer whispered, it's time you knew everything. In a small, rented room, Amenhotep revealed the truth. The amulet you wear wasn't just found with you. It belongs to the royal bloodline. You are the son of Pharaoh Akheperura and a favored concubine who was forced to abandon you. Sahir's world tilted. Why tell me now? Because your rising prominence has drawn dangerous attention. Some in the palace already suspect. Your life may depend on knowing your true identity. Whispers spread through the palace like poison. Neferura's handmaiden warned her. Your father knows about you and Sahir. He's furious. That night, guards escorted Neferura to the temple of Isis. You'll remain here until your wedding to General Mayhan, her father commanded. Meanwhile, Sahir found himself isolated. Former allies avoided him. A servant loyal to Neferura slipped him a message. They plan to send her away to a sanctuary in Upper Egypt. The general grows impatient. Two powerful families conspired to separate them, seeing their bond as a threat to carefully orchestrated alliances. Sahir bribed a temple acolyte to deliver a message. That night, disguised as a priest, he slipped into the temple of Isis. Neferura waited in the sacred garden, moonlight silvering her tears. They're sending me away in 3 days, she whispered. We must flee together tonight. Sahir took her hands. There's something I must tell you first. He revealed his royal heritage, showing her the golden amulet. I am the Pharaoh's son, he said. I won't spend my life running. I'll claim my birthright instead. Neferura's eyes widened. Then we'll face this storm together. The Temple of the Sun stood silent as Sahir entered its forbidden archives. Ancient scrolls held the royal bloodlines, carefully preserved for eternity. The old priest guarding them recognized Sahir's amulet. I've been waiting for you, he said. Your name was deliberately erased from these records. Together they found the papyrus scroll listing Pharaoh Akheperura's children. A space had been scraped clean where Sahir's name should have been. There was a prophecy, the priest explained. A son born during the great storm would bring tremendous change to Egypt. Some feared that change. Neferua escaped the temple using a festival procession as cover. She found Sahir at their prearranged meeting place near the Nile. "My father and General Mayhen are hunting for us both," she said. They sought refuge with Pharaohs, who had suspected Sahir's heritage all along. "The royal court must hear your claim," the old scribe insisted. When confronted by temple guards, Sahir stood his ground. "We refuse to be pawns in your political games," he declared, holding Neferua's hand firmly in his. "We demand the right to determine our own futures." Hidden in a fisherman's hut, Neferua cradled Sahir's face between her palms. "Listen to me," she whispered fiercely. "I don't care about your royal blood or your name. I loved you when you were just a scribe from the desert." Tears glistened in her eyes. "You see me, not as a prize or a political asset, but as myself. No one has ever done that before." Their lips met in a desperate kiss, a promise amid chaos. Outside, torches appeared on the horizon. The temple guards had found them. "Whatever happens," Sahir vowed, "this is not our end." In the temple of Ptah, Senenmut's rage echoed off the stone walls. "You have defiled my daughter's honor," he shouted at Sahir. "The punishment is death." "Father, no!" Neferua cried. Sahir stood tall, removing the golden amulet from beneath his robes. "I claim protection by right of blood." The assembled priests gasped at the royal symbol. Sahir then revealed a sealed clay tablet. "This bears the pharaoh's personal seal, proof of my heritage." At that moment, a royal messenger burst through the doors. "The pharaoh demands the presence of Sahir, son of the desert." The throne room fell silent as Sahir approached the aged pharaoh. Akeperua's once powerful frame had diminished, but his eyes remained sharp. "You wear my symbol," the pharaoh said. "Explain yourself." Sahir knelt. "Why was I abandoned in the desert, father?" The royal court gasped at his boldness. Unexpectedly, the pharaoh's eyes filled with tears. "To save your life. A prophecy foretold your death if you remained in the palace." His voice broke. "I sent you away out of love, not rejection." "I don't seek your throne," Sahir said. "Only acknowledgement of my name." Sahir rode back to Memphis with the royal seal, official recognition as the pharaoh's son. His heart pounded with urgency. He found Neferua beside the sacred pool where they first met. Her eyes widened at his approach. "I thought you'd be trapped in the palace," she whispered. "Nothing could keep me from returning to you." He knelt before her. "My father has acknowledged me, but I've made my own choice about my future." Taking her hands, he said, "Neferua, will you build a life with me? Not one dictated by others, but one we choose together." They married beneath the stars, on a small island in the Nile. No grand temple, no procession of nobles, just two souls pledging themselves to each other. Thutmose conducted the simple ceremony. Amenhotep, frail but determined, placed a wreath of lotus flowers on Neferua's brow. "The stars that guided me to you now witness our union," Sahir said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I, who once felt trapped by my birth, now find freedom in our love," Neferua replied. As they exchanged simple gold bands, the full moon reflected perfectly in the Nile, a divine blessing from Isis herself. At the edge of the celebration, partially hidden by a flowering acacia tree reminiscent of the one where Sahir was found as an infant, Neferua's mother, Meritaten, stood watching. Tears streamed silently down her dignified face, catching the golden light of the setting sun. When Neferua noticed her presence and approached, the older woman opened her arms, embracing her daughter with unexpected fervor. "Your father wouldn't come," she whispered, her voice carrying both regret and understanding. "His pride is wounded, but his heart still beats for you. He will soften with time." She pulled back, studying her daughter's radiant face. "I've never seen such joy in your eyes." "That alone tells me you've chosen wisely." Meritaten pressed a small ivory box into Neferua's hands. Inside lay a delicate gold anklet set with tiny lapis lazuli stones, a family heirloom passed from mother to daughter for generations. "May it remind you that some traditions are worth preserving," she said, "even as you forge new paths." In the days that followed, Sahir and Neferua established their home in a modest but beautiful dwelling near the temple observatory. Neither fully royal nor common, they created something entirely new in Memphis, a place where knowledge was valued above status, where scholars and healers gathered regardless of birth or rank. Amenhotep stayed with them until his health improved enough for a careful journey back to his desert temple, promising to return when the annual floods subsided. The pharaoh, acknowledging Sahir publicly, but respecting his wish for independence, granted the couple a small but significant stipend that allowed them to establish a school of astronomy and medicine. Students came from across Egypt, drawn by Sahir's revolutionary methods and Neferua's progressive teachings that welcomed both men and women who showed aptitude. General Mehan, his pride wounded, but his political instincts intact, eventually found a more advantageous marriage alliance with a noble family from the north. Senenmut remained distant, but ceased his active opposition, recognizing that his daughter's unconventional choice had ironically enhanced rather than diminished the family's influence in intellectual circles. One morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sahir and Neferua stood on their rooftop observatory. The same stars that had guided Sahir's predictions now faded into the growing light of a new day. "Look there," Neferua said, pointing to where the first sliver of sun broke the horizon. "The royal astronomers would say that's just Ra beginning his daily journey." "And what do you say?" Sahir asked, his arm around her waist. "That it's a reminder," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Every dawn offers a chance to rewrite the stories we've been told must be true." Sahir nodded, thinking of his journey from abandoned infant to royal son to something entirely of his own making. "We've written our own destiny," he said, watching as the golden light spilled across Memphis, illuminating both ancient pyramids and newly built homes with equal brilliance. "And this is just the first chapter of our story," Neferua added, her free hand resting lightly on her abdomen where their child, a future neither bound by rigid tradition nor untethered from wisdom of the past, had just begun to grow. Below them, Memphis awakened. Temple drums announced morning rituals, market vendors called their wares, boats pushed off from docks to begin their daily journeys on the life-giving Nile. The rhythm of Egypt continued as it had for thousands of years, yet within that great flowing current, Sahir and Neferua had created their own small eddy, a space where change and tradition could coexist, where love could transcend the boundaries of birth and station. And somewhere in the vastness of the Egyptian sky, they both knew, the gods smiled upon their union, not because they had followed prescribed paths, but because they had honored something even more ancient and sacred, the truth within their hearts. There's something so powerfully human about defying impossible odds for love, isn't there? The courage to say, "This is my life," when the whole world tells you that you don't have a choice. If Sahir and Neferua's epic struggle for love and identity moved you as deeply as it moved me, I'd absolutely love to hear which moment resonated with you the most. Was it when Amenhotep revealed Sahir's true heritage? Or perhaps when Neferua stood her ground against her powerful father? Maybe it was that beautiful wedding beneath the stars, where two souls created their own tradition. Share your favorite moment in the comments below. I personally respond to every single one because these conversations about what touches our hearts are what makes storytelling so magical. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own truth, or found yourself irresistibly drawn to someone who seemed completely forbidden by the rules of your world? Your stories matter too, and our community would be honored to hear them. Before you go, if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, what are you waiting for? Each week we journey through time to uncover the most heart-wrenching, soul-stirring tales of love and courage from across the ages. Our last video about Lysandra and Demetrius in ancient Greece had viewers messaging me saying they were literally sobbing by the end. Turn on those notifications, just click that little bell, so you never miss the moment when a new story drops. Trust me, our next tale about star-crossed lovers during the Silk Road era will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate and destiny. Thank you for traveling through time with me today. Until our paths cross again beneath the next ancient sky, keep your heart open to the impossible